is Jim Fitzgerald, also known as Fitz.
And you can call me Seamus tonight because what's the date of this recording, Ray?
It's March 17th.
Which happens to be St. Patrick's Day. So we're
Yes.
also going live, but you may listen to this afterwards. So everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day. And we're wearing green. And Ken, our guest is Ken. He probably has something on green, and we'll just leave it at that. Ray, you have something you want to start us with?
You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about two incidents that occurred last Thursday. The Michigan synagogue shooting at Temple, Israel, and the Old Dominion University shooting. Kind of brief recap. In both instances, almost simultaneously or within a short period of time, two mass shootings or attempted mass shootings that were looking to take place at both locations. In the first one at the Michigan synagogue, Temple, Israel, there was a bunch of kids, and he used what I like to call a hybrid attack to use a vehicle to kind of ram in and drive down a hallway in the school, and then jumped out with a rifle. And if it wasn't for the quick action of the security at the facility, it would have been a different story. And in a similar situation, there was an individual that went into the ROTC classroom at Old Dominion University and shot the instructor before he was overtaken by ROTC students who wound up killing him. I thought it was pretty interesting. Jim, you have any thoughts? And I want to get Ken's intake here too, because of the two offenders. There's a similarity between them. I'm going to let you touch on that, Ken. But Jim, you want to add anything first?
Yeah, just to be anticipated. And all three of us were in the FBI, certainly during the first Iraq War, then the second one, and even though we may have worked criminal type stuff, at least I know Ray and I did. Ken, you may have been a little more diversified back then, but we were certainly put on watch and or put on notice, I should say, to be on the lookout for different types of insurgents and other type terrorist activities. So of course now it's the Iran war, and these things are happening two in one day, seemingly not connected. But yeah, I want to poor Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shaw. Probably didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and joins the military. He serves in a few different campaigns overseas, war zones. Comes home, probably thinks, I'm sure his family, all right, nice job at ODU, imparting your wisdom and knowledge. Seems he had a lot of it in a classroom one day, and this wacky guy walks in and just takes him out. That's the bad side. There's no good side of this, but at least some ROTC students stood up, and they didn't even have a firearm with them, but
Yeah.
they used a knife of some sort, one or more knives, and they took him out. I like how somebody coined the term. They rendered him non-living, and like we render bombs safe, so to speak. So yeah, good outcome there of sort of a bad start of the incident, and also. And I understand the security people at the Temple Israel in Michigan, they were trained by FBI, and after I believe Kash Patel started a program, or certainly was facilitating it, and had some very specific training what to look for and how to react. And those people took out the driver of this hybrid attack. So yeah, just summarizing that part there, and our prayers go out, of course, to Lieutenant Colonel Shaw and his family. Thank you for serving our country. He survives friggin' war zones and winds up getting
Yeah.
taken out in a classroom of Old Dominion University. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, that's the tragic irony that Lieutenant Shah had survived several tours in the Middle East, and then he comes back and he's offed by some deranged jihadist. So that is tough, and our prayers go out to the family. But I'm not surprised because you've got number one, you've got these global tensions, specifically the conflict in Iraq. And then number two, you're still getting imams in some of these mosques. They're still spewing vitriol and hatred towards Jews, towards Israel, and even towards the United States. So, although I think these fellows are probably lone wolves, and of course, the Bureau will have to check into that. They are just one fella is a Muslim from I believe it was Sierra Leone, and the other person is a Hezbollah. His brother was in Hezbollah, so no surprises here. These people, they manifest these. They listen to like the fella in Sierra Leone. His hero was Anwar al-Awlaki. That was his hero. That crazy imam for ISIS. So just no surprises, I guess. And you guys would know this better than me about manifesting certain types of suicidal, homicidal ideations.
Yeah, the thing that got me, that I found out later after I did a hit on one of the news shows, was that both of these individuals were naturalized citizens. And our offender, and I don't really like mentioning names of these offenders because I don't want to glorify them in any way. But the offender at ODU was, this is his second offense. Why wasn't he deported? And we could talk about this all night, guys, but I mean, it's just a disgrace how our immigration system is so broken with these things. Go ahead, Ken.
And Ray, you're right. I think the system failed a lot of people in this case. Why did he get out early? I mean, he's sentenced with terrorism charges, and they let him out early. So, do we have to revisit the sentencing guidelines, or is this somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office that needs to be spoken to? And then, probation. I'd like to know how the probation office handled this, if he had an officer, if they sat down with him, if so, how frequently was that done? And then finally, and I don't know if the Bureau would do this, but are they watching people that come out after terrorism, doing that time in terrorism, and maybe interview them just to kind of find out how they're doing, how are things going, or at least attempt to do that?
Ken, this is the last thing I'm going to say. If you're convicted of terrorism, and you're a naturalized citizen, you're convicted of terrorism in this country, when you're released from prison, it should be immediate deportation. Shouldn't even be any question about it.
They call it denaturalization, and that's
correct.
There is a process for that. That's
there is
the
a
legal
process
term
for it. Yeah, there is.
With you, I agree. Should have gone. They're gone.
So we can maybe have a whole episode on this coming up, but I just wanted to bring our listeners and our audience up to par on this, and keep your eyes open, folks, and and I'm glad, just like the military, the U.S. military in France about 6-7 years ago, when there was a terrorist attack on a train, the French people, all kinds of cowered in their seats, and a few military guys stood up and took out the terrorist. And I know Clint Eastwood even made a movie about it, 1517 or something like that, was the time of the train. So these are heroes in the classroom that day. It's a shame we need them. But don't just crawl under your desk in an embryonic position when something like this happens. Of course, try to run if you can, but at some point you have a chance, take the guy out. And we can come back to this at some other point, perhaps. But again, God rest the soul of Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shaw, and thank you, sir, for serving our country. No one ever expected you would meet your end in that situation, and let's hope that doesn't happen again.
I agree. I would like to kind of switch gears here. The reason why we have Ken Strain. Ken is a retired FBI agent that worked with Jim and I. We didn't work together, but we worked in the same agency together. We worked a lot of the same types of cases together. And tonight we want to talk about something that's close, very close to Ken's heart. It's what I like to call the Lost Rose of Dublin, Annie McCarrick. I want to start out. It's a quiet Friday afternoon in March 1993. A 26-year-old American woman is walking along a road just outside of Dublin, heading toward the remote hills of the Wicklow Mountains. She has groceries waiting back home, dinner plans that night, and then she vanishes. No witnesses, no trace, no answers for over 30 years. Ken, welcome to the show again. I know we're not going to be on the headlines today, but we're speaking with you because this case has kind of resonated with you, and the fact that Annie McCarrick isn't just some random victim of a crime. And I'm going to let you tell our audience who she is to you and to your family.
Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Fitz, for having me on and sharing this haunting case with you. The shame of it is, in the end, it may boil down to just sloppy police work that prolonged the case by 30 years. However, Annie McCarrick was a family friend, and the interaction between our families was pretty strong. Annie was a close friend of my sister, and I would see Annie. She would come over the house from time to time. And her dad, John McCarrick, was a public school teacher, but he had been a park ranger, I think, in Suffolk County for a period of time. And then Nancy McCarrick, his wife and Annie's mother, worked in the high school. So, I did little odd jobs for John over at JFK one summer, and I would see him over by the Great South Bay on his boat, and he would take me for a spin around the bay. We were close. And so when she disappeared in '93, I heard it from my mom, who of course remained in our town, Bayport Blue Point. I heard it from her, but I was so busy with a career with FBI and with justice, I just didn't think any more about it, except, and then finally 10, 11 years later, the case had still not been solved. And I'm working in California. And I said, you know what, I'm going to get involved. I have to get involved in this case because nothing's happening. And, that's when I reached back to Nancy and I said, I hope you don't mind, but I think I might be able to help. And I think the first thing you have to do is report it to the FBI over on Long Island. There's a resident agency over there. So at least get something on paper that way. But, it went from bad to worse. And again, this as well as I do, when these things happen, you're going right to the inner circle of family and friends and to investigate this. And in this case, that would have been her friends. But just backing up a little bit, so she's the only daughter of John and Nancy McCarrick. She's an Irish American girl, and she falls in love with Ireland. She goes to college in Ireland. She comes back to the United States, gets a master's degree at Stony Brook, and says, Dad, I love Ireland, and I need to go back there. I want to work there. I want to live there. I want Ireland to be my home. And so, John was like, I don't know, please, baby, don't go. But he said, okay, if you must go. And so she went back. She went back in January of 1993. She worked part-time in the Java Cafe in Dublin, and she lived with two roommates in Sandymount, Dublin. And of course, it's interesting. She attended the St. Patrick's Day parade in Dublin. What is it? 30 years ago, 33 years ago, I guess. And so she attended that. And then in 9 days she would vanish. She would disappear. The next Friday, I think.
How long had she been living there at the time in Ireland?
So she had returned to Ireland in January, and now it was March.
Okay.
So just a few months. But she, like I said, she had gone to school, I think, at Maynooth University for a few years. So she knew Ireland pretty well. And the circle of friends, these are friends that she had made from, previous time she had spent there. And of course, that she was hosting a party on the Saturday, and then it was called in on Sunday from from one of the boys that was invited. He calls it in on Sunday, calls Nancy McCarrick and says, hey, not for nothing, but we were supposed to have dinner, like a little dinner party with your daughter. She never answered the door, never answered the phone. And I'm looking at the apartment right now, and I don't see any lights on. I think something's wrong. And Nancy was going to visit her daughter on Monday. That Monday, she was flying there anyway. So of course now she's hopping on a flight. So that fella called it in, and just interesting. If you look at the timeline on that day, the last time anybody, that day she calls her roommates, two roommates. They go home to the countryside, so they say goodbye, Annie. We're out of here. You take care. So her two roommates are gone, two ladies. Then she calls a friend and says, would you like to go to the Wicklow Mountains with me to a small village about 50 miles away called Enniskerry? Would you like to do that? And the friend says, no, I'm not feeling very well. So that doesn't happen. And then the next thing you know, again, she's preparing for the Saturday dinner with friends, right? So she goes to Quinsworth on Friday about 11 o'clock, 11:30. She goes to Quinsworth grocery, and she picks up some butter, bread, items for the dinner. And so that's really the last time anybody, that digital footprint ends with the cash register receipt from Quinsworth. And then the interesting thing about it, when they finally do get access to her apartment, when her roommates come back, they find that the groceries are was either on the table in the kitchen, and they had not been put, and they were perishables too. They had not been put into the refrigerator or the fridge. So that was one thing. And then downstairs in the basement, she had clothing in the washing machine that was still there in the washing machine. So, you guys, I'm sure you have some idea. I've kind of set the scenario there, but it gets more complicated because then later on, some girl that used to work with her said, "Oh no, I saw her jumping on the bus to Enniskerry that afternoon." And I didn't talk to her. I used to work with her, but I didn't talk to her. But I believe I saw her get on the bus. So now, and this would become for the next years, this would become kind of the red herring. Everybody went off to Enniskerry with this one sighting. Was 50 miles away, late in the afternoon. It's winter. You guys know how it is in Europe in winter. The light. Single girl. She has dinner for people the next day, but everybody gladly went off down that path to Enniskerry, and then it became more and more complicated.
Ken, she's not lost. She's not running. She was building a life over there. And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts on of what made this case stand out early. Because look, there's two things that jump right off the paper right in the beginning here.
Yeah.
Wash in the washing machine that's not done.
Right.
And groceries that are perishable that aren't put away.
Yeah.
What's the urgency that she, you know what I mean? So what made this case stand out to you early on?
Well, I mean that was one of the first things I noticed, and again, I'm going back to these friends that she had, and did one of those friends suddenly pop up and say, "Hey, come with me," and drop everything you're doing, and you need to come with me for whatever reason? Did that happen? But I asked the detective, an Irish detective, who was kind of working on the case with an American lawyer, Michael Griffith, who was working on that case in Turkey he was defending the American in Turkey, Midnight Express. That's Michael Griffith. Anyway, so the first thing I asked these guys, and again, I didn't get into this until 2004, and then I got all the paperwork, and there was, and I think this will get to the crux of it. Mr. McCarrick, his intuition, he just had a bad feeling about one or two people in that inner circle of friends. and he just, he said, how did these people get alibis? You're telling me that all of these people had quote airtight alibis, even though they were out of town. So again, it comes to these brothers, allegedly these brothers that were part of her clique, and there was an older brother, a younger brother, and that would, and later and just recently, stuff started spilling out just maybe 2 years ago, which would point directly to this inner circle, and probably one of the most sacrilegious pieces of police work I have ever seen in my life, which I think cost them 30 years. I don't know if I'm explaining that to you succinctly.
Let's just back up a little bit here, and for the younger members of our audience, you talked about the digital footprint ended with the cash register receipt from the groceries that day. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure in 1993 she did not have a cell phone yet.
No.
And emails were not out. People weren't doing emails in 93. The internet was so new. I think mostly internet, military and commercial entities, perhaps. So we don't have that kind of evidence to work on, emails and text messages, things like that. I'm sure she had a landline, and I'm hoping those records were in fact examined back in the day. But maybe she didn't have a landline. I don't know. Things are. Ireland is in many cases about 30 to 40 years behind the rest of the world, and in some ways that's good. I was just there about a year ago, and it's refreshing that their way of life as it is, but it could certainly get in the way of an investigation such as this. And I'll tell you that bus trip where she was allegedly spotted, to me, that washes out right away with clothes in a washer, and no pun intended there at all. But even more so, the perishable groceries sitting on a table. There's no emergency quick enough not to just throw the whole bag in the fridge and then take off if you have to do something. And if there's no forced entry at the house, no scuffle indicators, broken windows or lamps or knocked over, whatever, something or someone got her out of there really quick, and maybe she was comfortable with them being in there, but then something went south, and she was taken out somehow. Maybe even in daylight, it's not clear.
Well, Fitz, the real tragedy is this whole thing just, it grew legs. The trip to Enniskerry grew legs, and all of a sudden there's excuse me for a second. Yeah, so it grew legs, and the next thing you know, there's a serial killer and that is arrested, and then he's let out, and so they're looking at this possible serial killer, but that tells me that this guy lives in a town, and the fact that he would even meet her and she's out in Enniskerry for 1 or 2 hours, and they cross paths, and it just didn't make sense to me. But a lot of the investigation seemed to go into the serial killer Larry Murphy, and it's interesting because John Douglas shows up in this thing as well, and so he's looking at Larry Murphy. He provides a profile of Larry Murphy, and so the thing just kept building and building and building. And then only when I went there to retrace the steps of Annie McCarrick in 2021 in September, when I met the Gardaí police, I had a letter from Mrs. McCarrick to the police. They said, okay, you can meet with us, and we'll accept the letter, and that's it. We can't talk about the case. But when I got there and I handed the letter off at the end of our meeting, which was very short, and these people don't give up anything. But at the end of the meeting, I said, you know what? I just retraced her steps out to Enniskerry, and I'm telling you, I don't buy it, not for a moment, for many reasons. And I have this gut feeling as well that and so the officer pauses and he said, you wouldn't be wrong to think along those lines. And that's when the ground shifted under my feet. And I knew that they had jettisoned that, the Enniskerry thing, and that they were going back to the beginning. And then I think it was a year and a half later, they upgraded the case from a missing person case to a murder case.
Hmm.
You know, listening to you, Ken, and reading a little bit about this, it appears that the investigation started down the wrong road right from the beginning. Um, what is your understanding of what the investigators believed initially happened?
Yeah, well, they relied, number one, they were slow to jump on the case, and several days passed. In fact, one of the police apparently said, "Don't worry, Mrs. McCarrick. She's probably with a young man somewhere in Ireland," and that cost them right there about two to 3 days in the beginning. So then, again, round up the usual suspects, this inner circle. Everybody's got an alibi, and I asked them. I asked the detective. I said the investigator. I said, alibis. What do you mean alibis? And for these two guys, these brothers? Oh yeah, they had alibis from their family.
Hmm.
I mean, you got to be kidding me. So yeah, no, I mean, and here's probably the most tragic part. We were making after it's upgraded to murder, we're making a documentary in New York, RTE documentary, and one of the family members says, "Oh, this is another McCarrick family member says, by the way, I think you should know that." Annie went out with the younger brother, and she was allegedly assaulted a week before she vanished. Whoa, I mean, how many years? And this person is just blurting it out, and then it gets worse. Gets worse because apparently, at the beginning of the investigation, 2 or 3 of her girlfriends who knew what was happening with this relationship that was toxic, they fax into the police their statement about what Annie told them about the relationship, about the assault, and so we learned that, and then the police learn about it in 2023, and they said, no, I don't think that ever happened. No, we never received anything from these ladies. That's not true. No faxes came in with, and then shortly after that, within like 2 or 3 weeks, oh shit. We found the faxes. We found the statements from her girlfriends, right? Back from 1993. I mean, are you kidding? I mean, all that time spent running out to Enniscary and that whole thing, it wasted so much time. It was really tragic.
Was
It
there
makes
a
you almost
time? Go ahead, Jeff.
it makes you almost wonder who was the woman who allegedly saw Annie get on a bus to go to Enniscary.
Yeah, it was Fitz.
Was she tied in with the brothers somehow?
Yeah, maybe. Could be. I don't know. This was a coworker from a previous job that she had when she was a student, and they hung on that like it was a holy grail.
Sure. Mm.
Was there something that was said or a sighting of Annie at a pub?
I'm glad you brought that up, Ray. Yes, this is part of the Enniscary saga because apparently some people in the town claim that they saw her with a mystery man in Poppy's Cafe to begin with. That was one sighting, and then in Johnny Fox's pub, which is up in the hills above Enniscary. It's about 3 miles away on one of those Irish roads, serpentine roads in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the show opens up at 9 p.m. So I never even gave that any credence at all, because there are Americans that go up there because the music is good, and it's it's known as the kind of the highest bar in Ireland at its altitude, at its elevation. But yeah, the bouncer said he thinks he saw Annie and with a mystery man. So that also got in. And then there was another one, and this is kind of interesting, that there was an IRA guy. He was a child abuser, IRA guy from that area. He met Annie in the vicinity. He may have been drinking, may have talked out of turn, and then she's there, and then he thinks, I've got to offer, I have to murder her. There was that as well, and in fact, just to kind of put that to bed, talking about work with the FBI, my first case was an IRA case. I had to this is my first case. I had to interview a person that was possibly involved in the murder of a British Army captain. So, and so I got to know about the IRA and stuff like that. And finally, I contacted somebody that was former IRA. And, I spoke with him, and he said, yes, I've heard that. He said, I investigated that. No, absolutely not. We would never do something like that. And God bless Annie McCarrick. And if I can do anything for you or Mrs. McCarrick, please let me know. And, when you speak to someone, if someone's telling the truth or not. I really believe that. And so I think that was another lark. But the press ran with that as well. And I thought, it's all about that inner circle every time I think back.
A couple of things. First of all, IRA is the Irish Republican Army. They've been around for 100 years. Brits out of Ireland and the 26 counties and all that. And they were a paramilitary organization. Some dealt with the political parts, other dealt with, quite frankly, some terrorist parts. But I will throw this out. She was an American citizen. The IRA was getting a lot of funding out of the U.S.
Right.
And that would have been a pretty stupid thing for them to do, to somehow off an American citizen and possibly dry up some of their sources. So unless, of course, they think she's cooperating with the British and the Royal Constabulary and what have you there in Ireland. And this is Dublin. It's not up in Belfast or the northern six counties. So of Northern Ireland. So of course, things like that should be looked into, but I wouldn't put that real high on my list in terms of that. And the troubles, as they say over there with a capital T, they were kind of wearing down by the mid 90s or so with some agreements that was made between the UK and the IRA and whatever, and they allegedly laid down their guns. So, but I'm also reading the book Tell No Secrets about the IRA and how they did kidnap some women and looks like years later killed them. But that was back in the early 70s up in Belfast when things were really, really going bad, and people didn't know who was spying on the provisional wings of the IRA. They're like the terrorists, the bombers. Anyway, so I would, of course, investigate this lead, but these concentric circles we talk about all the time. Who was closest? If she was with her family, in Long Island, all right. So we have to start with parents and siblings, whatever. And of course, that wouldn't have happened in this family. But here she's living with her social family, and living with them. And if and of course dating one or more of these brothers, that's where you have to start. And boy, if the police have been operating 33 years now, minus 9 days, if I remember what you said from when she went missing. And the brothers had alibis. Yeah, you know what? It's time to re-examine those alibis. And these guys, they must be in their late 50s now, if they're still alive.
The younger one is 62, and the older one is in another country. I won't name it, but has serious health issues. I think he's on his deathbed. But just one other thing, John McCarrick had had a very good intuition about what was happening. And I read when I looked at the paperwork that he left, and he died. By the way, John died of a broken heart in 2009. So, and his wife now is in her 80s. But when I read some of the questions he had for the Gardaí, they were pretty spot on, and he sensed that there was something awry with these two brothers. And then, and I didn't mention this, but my high school classmate, he actually was Annie's uncle, and so he got involved in the case as well. But he told me, he said that he was very alarmed when they got to Ireland to look for Annie. The first person that they met was one of the brothers, and he was like, taking them around, chaperoning them, helping them, being obsequious to them, and at the same time trying to overhear everything that was going on. And he would constantly ask them, what's going on? How's the progress of the investigation? How's it looking? To the point, according to my friend John, my classmate, where John McCarrick turns around and says, "Hey, buddy, butt out. You have no business in this." Kind of shocking. So John suspected these people early on. It was in his notes. And he's asking the guard, "Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this?" And there was a list of questions, which were pretty good. I looked at them. I said, "Yeah, maybe not FBI type questions, but not bad questions."
I look back at this and I keep going back to the apartment. I keep going back to the groceries. I keep going back to the wash.
Right.
And that's, to me, is I think one of the most important things. I think the encounter she had with whoever it was, for whatever reason, was sudden. And I think she was removed rather quickly, and a vehicle was probably used. And it's someone that's local. It's not someone that's outside the area. It's someone that's local. It was controlled. It wasn't sensational. There wasn't random chaos because there didn't seem to be any disruption within her apartment.
Yeah,
it happened fast, and it happened with a purpose. The problem is what's the purpose here? There's a reason why she was specifically selected. In other words, I don't think it was just some random act here.
Yeah, I think it might have something to do with possibly a love triangle, or the fact that the younger guy had a I guess a close girlfriend or something like that. Something was amiss there. I don't want to get too deep into it because I'm not entirely sure. But so it was it was upgraded to murder, and then last year they detained the younger brother for 24 hours. That's all they could keep him for 24. They had to cut him loose after 24 hours, and then shortly thereafter they dug up his former house, parts of his former house, including the patio. It was like a forensic excavation. But it didn't yield anything. But then later on, shortly after that, his older brother, who was in the hospital, called the Irish media, and he was ranting and raving about, look, I didn't do it, we didn't do it, it was, and I listened to it. It was all about them, and not one word for Annie McCarrick. It was like, where's the empathy here? It was just protecting them. So I just thought that it doesn't sit well with me.
As we've said in the past, allegiances really change after a few decades. And who were the big tough guys back in the day may not be the tough guys now. And you've already said one guy is perhaps on his deathbed. And I want to be careful here. Innocent until proven guilty, and we're not naming names. But I'm sure some people in Ireland could, figure some things out here. All I'm talking about is the police investigation that really has to take this to the next level. I can't imagine the two roommates, and I believe they were female roommates, who just happened to go away that weekend. And I'm not suggesting they were a part of anything here, but I'm sure three women living together, they knew most of each other's secrets. They knew what was going on. And I know you said there were some faxes that were eventually found. I'm not sure if it was from one of these female roommates or some other friend of hers.
Well, these are friends from the United States that she she was talking about the relationship, sharing the relationship and the problems with these. I think there were two girls.
But nonetheless, these roommates had to have some information of what her daily life was like, and would she ever come home in the past and leave, groceries on the counter because she's forgetful or something? I doubt that very much. Or her wash in a washing machine. Interesting though, a lot of European countries don't have dryers, but just leaving it in the washer would be interesting in and of itself instead of taking it out and hanging it. People don't realize a lot of the cities in Europe and other parts of the world don't have dryers. It takes up a lot of power that way, and it's a luxury that we in the U.S. tend to have, not them. So I'm not sure if there was a dryer involved or not, but you still think somehow the clothes would have been put one to the other. And Ken, as far as you know, has there ever been a reward offered in this case?
Yes, in the beginning, there was a reward by the McCarrick family. I think it was up to maybe $100,000, and that over time, John died. And that kind of petered out. So I'm not sure if there's any reward presently. I do not think so. But one of the things that haunts me is this was about maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was in Bayport. I went to church, and Mrs. McCarrick is a very religious person, and I saw her at Mass. After Mass, we met on the steps, and I said, "So sorry," and she said, "Ken, I know I'm never going to see my daughter again. Please bring her home. Please bring her home." And that really, that was like somebody had punched me in the stomach. I just,
Yeah.
Besides this serial killer that supposedly John Douglas was a part of this investigation, and I happen to know he retired in June of '95, so I'm not sure how much time he put into this case, at least in the FBI. Perhaps he followed up on it once he retired. I know you said this was in was it
2000,
March
yeah,
'93 is when.
yeah,
Was
yeah.
Douglas involved since then, as far as you know?
I'm sorry.
Was Douglas involved after his retirement?
I think this was after he retired. This would have been like in 2004, 2005.
Oh, okay.
That's when I knew he had gone over there. Mary Ellen O'Toole, and I think you guys know Mary Ellen.
Yeah.
She was someone that I was connected with over at BAU for a little bit of time, and she said, "I can't do anything, but maybe other people can, maybe over the Legats, maybe out there in UK and Dublin might be able to help."
Well,
I heard something about this theory about this vanishing triangle. Is there any credence to that, Ken? And explain what that is for our audience.
Yeah, so I mean, once Annie McCarrick disappeared, there followed a succession of other young women who vanished without a trace. I think there's a total of 7 or 8 of them together over the next few years, and oddly, until Larry Murphy was arrested in 2000. But this vanishing triangle is much, much bigger than you think. It incorporates several counties, the Wicklow Mountains, and when you dig a little deeper into the other women's cases, you find that there are some spouses, boyfriends, things of that nature. Not this other guy that was accorded all the honors. No, not him, but other people that these girls. That orbited these girls and were suspects. But the vanishing triangle, I think it became a huge media thing, and Ireland had changed from a land of saints and leprechauns to something deadly. Just a lot of media.
so okay, it's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle that was so mysterious in the '70s, but it was so big and so wide, and there were so many logical explanations why aircraft and ships were disappearing there. Perhaps this other vanishing triangle in Ireland can be explained along with distance, but also interpersonal relationships with people. But boy, I'll tell you, I've worked a few missing persons cases over the years where they're long term, and certainly when it's a child that's gone missing, whether it's a young child or older. And talking to those parents, I can't imagine any more of a hell on earth than just it's one thing a child being murdered, it's bad enough as that is. There's some level of closure by however you want to define that, but just missing and not knowing where that person is, that just has to be the worst case possible for any parent out there. And I'm sure our audience, can relate to this. And I'm not sure they did searches of the various bodies of water and everything out there, fields of pod and sod and what have you. And
Yeah.
and obviously with no
Yeah.
no luck, so to speak. So yeah, I feel for those parents. And you said the mom is still alive. You saw her in church a few years ago.
Yeah, she's in her 80s right now, Jim, and she built a shrine in her backyard to her daughter, and that's where she finds, I think, peace and harmony, visiting
Hmm.
the shrine. The other thing, when I went out there and I got into those Wicklow Mountains, it would be a perfect place to
Sure.
deposit the body. It's just so vast. You probably know the Wicklows yourself.
I've just a year ago in Ireland, and I can relate to some of that type of landscape very well. Then, if you were going to dispose of a body, it would not be hard to do and make it very difficult to ever find and recover, especially if you know the area, since perhaps you were a child and you know where to go, where other people go,
Hmm.
more importantly, where they don't go. And yeah, between caves and shallow graves and certainly lakes and locks, there are things that could happen there. Um, and obviously, do we know if her purse was found at the scene? We're going way back now. Any kind of credit card, cash. Apparently, there was no theft or robbery indicators or burglary at the house. Correct?
No, no, there
Yeah.
was none of that. But there might have been. There's a mention, and I couldn't corroborate it, of someone finding a handbag in a bar not too far away that might belong to her. But I've followed up on that, and I've not been able to solidify it or confirm it, I should say.
Yeah, that would be important to know potentially, but the Garda, I'm sure, are keeping that close to their vest also. Yeah, it's a tough one. And look, we have an audience in Ireland, and we've been
We
contacted
do.
by folks there. And if you're listening to this and you have anything to add, contact us at our website, at our blog site, or perhaps more importantly, call the Garda and let them know what you may know about this case. And I'm sure a reward of some sort could be worked out with family members at this point, if that's really what you want. But I think just doing it for for doing the right thing, for what God wants you to do. I mean, you can fill in any category you want, but that's something that if you know anything about this case, really contact the right people and let them know what to do about it. Certainly, where Annie may be found right now, even 33 years later, give the family some kind of closure in that regard. Um, so, yeah, we'll just ask people out there. I mean, start with that inner circle. Doesn't mean they're guilty, but they may know something that just hasn't come up yet. And after 33 years, maybe someone on their deathbed, whoever they may be, could provide some information and uh, and, um, and give some sanity back to the family of knowing where their family member may be.
Ken, if the person or persons responsible are still alive, what would you want to say to them?
I'd want to tell them just to do the decent thing and that we all need closure. And just I don't we don't want to know why or how, or we just want to find her and give her a proper burial. That's all.
You know, um, and this may be kind of tough question, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But what do you believe personally, having been involved in this for 20 years? Um, what likely happened to Annie?
I'm just speculating, Ray, that she may have been, maybe out of jealousy, or a person was worried that the relationship would come to light, possibly, and that this person panicked and abducted Annie and took her away, and that person might have had some help along the way, and then vanished, and that's it. That's what I think happened.
And being that you've been involved in this case for over 20 years now, and let me just say, the case is yours. what would you do, or what do you think needs to be done in order to finally get this case solved?
That's a great question. So, you guys mentioned something that I think might help, and that's to offer a substantial reward. Um, Apart from that, without a body, I think it's going to be tough to make a case, and I think it's going to rely on other people coming out of the woodwork and saying, "I need to talk. I need to get this off my chest," or to go back to maybe a sick person and say, "Hey, I know you want to go to heaven, and I'm not guaranteeing you go to heaven. Maybe purgatory if you tell us what you know."
Right now, wow, I'm always beginning my sentences with I got to break that habit. Ken, I'm watching a series right now on Netflix called A Friend, a Murderer, and it's about a kidnapped young woman in Denmark, the outskirts of Copenhagen. And then it turns out there were two other women that were abducted. First woman was murdered, and they didn't find her body for well over a year, I believe. And these things do happen in countries you don't think have high crime rates or high crime, violent crime issues. And the police made some mistakes. They kind of admitted it in that first investigation. It was only 2016, I believe, that investigation. So yeah, and I've met the Garda. I spent some time with them in my first trip to Ireland a few decades ago, and my one last year. And the one thing we know about law enforcement, you can be the best officer, the best investigator. If you haven't investigated certain kinds of crimes, though, doesn't make you a bad man or a bad agent, investigator, detective, but it just means you don't have experience in that type of a crime. And I don't know in the local jurisdiction of where Annie went missing, what the experience would have been for these Garda members and how they would have handled that. And certainly a missing person situation, especially if it's an adult, always buys time for the bad guy,
Right.
whoever that is. And 24, 48 hours is really all they need sometimes. And that's the critical time frame that we would really need, the authorities would need to have those answers come to them from the people we're talking about that say, hey, it's been 33 years. This young woman lost her life for what, for who? And I have a feeling she was incapacitated in the house by surprise. She invited someone in, and then whether she was taken out right away, waited until nighttime, and that's when maybe a second person was involved, someone that the person who disabled her totally trusted. And especially if there was an assault the week before, I'm not blaming it on anyone specific here, but past indicator is the best predictor of future behavior. Past behavior, best indicator of future behavior.
Right.
And that's something we have to look into here with everyone involved in this case. So this is one of those cases, I think, if given a full court press, to use a basketball analogy, by the police, even bringing in, federal police or national, the FBI equivalent in Ireland, and really focus on this, a mini task force they put together. This seems like a case that possibly could be solved with the right reward money offered, the right questions asked of the right people at the right time. This may be a solvable case, and I hope if someone's out there listening to Cold Red, they would consider either, if you're an investigator, put that team together and get back on this case. But if you're also a person who knew Annie from back in the day, or you've heard something over the years, make that call. I hope they do that.
I agree.
Me too. Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate you having me share this haunting story.
Ken, before we go, we see right over your head your book, A Cop's Son. Tell us a little bit about that and how people can get it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's my new book. It's a true crime memoir, and it goes through my federal career with 3 distinct and distinguished federal agencies. FBI, U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Department of Justice. And it's also a homage to my father, who was an NYPD officer for 38 years. And so it's my giving back to him. He was a tremendous influence on me. You can pick the book up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Post Hill Press.
Sounds good. We talked about it a lot on the earlier episode when you were on with us and your career up to that point, and a fascinating life. Anyone either check out that podcast and buy the book, and Ken will appreciate that. Ray, final words, and I'll take us out.
Yeah, Ken, I just want to just say that my heart goes out to you. I know you've taken a lot of recent trips out to Dublin. I've been in Ireland a couple times just recently, about 2 years ago. But your efforts to keep this case in the public eye, I think, is really important. And I think your efforts, I don't want them to go unnoticed, at least not by Jim and I. I think it's commendable by you doing that.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, Ken. And again, Ken Strange is our guest for tonight on this episode of Cold Red. Please check out our website, our blog site, coldredpodcast.com. Leave messages, commentary, etc. Like and subscribe us, share everything you can do in a good way with someone's podcast like our own. And thanks to Matt McLaughlin and Matt Robinson, our producers, Rick Schilling, our music coordinator, and everybody. Thanks to Ken and Ray for being on with me tonight. And everybody, please check us out next time on Cold Red.